First story. I'm not one to make impulsive decisions. In fact, I'm probably the least spontaneous person you'll ever meet. So, when I found myself in the middle of nowhere, with 3 complete strangers, on a road trip I didn't plan for, it felt like a movie. A weird, uncomfortable, but thrilling movie. It all started with a mundane task. I had to pick up my car from the shop. Nothing exciting about that. But my day was about to take a bizarre turn. The mechanic, a guy named Mike, who'd been fixing my beat-up 2009 Honda Civic for the past 5 years, called me in the morning. "It's ready," he said, his voice rough from what I guessed was a lifelong smoking habit. I headed over to the garage, just a 10-minute walk from my apartment. When I got there, Mike wasn't around. Instead, I was greeted by a lanky guy in his mid-20s, dressed in a tie-dye shirt and cargo shorts. "You here for the Civic?" he asked. "Yeah, is Mike around?" I replied, feeling a bit uneasy. "Nah, man, he had to take off." "I'm Kyle. I work here sometimes." Something about the way he said sometimes didn't exactly fill me with confidence, but I didn't want to be rude. "I just wanted my car." Kyle handed me the keys, and I signed the paperwork. Simple enough. Then, as I was about to leave, a girl, maybe in her early 20s, with dyed pink hair and a backpack way too big for her frame, rushed up to the shop. "Hey, Kyle, is it ready?" she asked, barely out of breath. "Yeah, Jess." "All set," he said, nodding toward a beat-up van parked next to my car. I wasn't really paying attention to them until she turned to me and said, "Hey, are you the guy with the Civic? We're heading the same way, you wanna follow us?" Strength in numbers, right? I paused. Where are you headed?" She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made you second-guess your instincts. "We're going west. Long road ahead." That's when it clicked, I wasn't going west. I was going south. But for some reason, I didn't correct her. Maybe it was because her energy was infectious, or maybe I just wanted to feel like I wasn't so predictable for once. So, instead of saying no, I said something I never thought would come out of my mouth. "Sure, why not?" Before I knew it, I was following their van down a dusty highway, out of the city, and into who knows where. They had no music playing, which was strange for a road trip, and we were driving for hours. Just as I was starting to question my sanity, Kyle pulled off the road into a tiny gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. We all got out to stretch our legs. The air was hot and dry, and the sun was starting to set. Jess leaned against the van, lighting a cigarette, while Kyle filled up the tank. That's when the third member of their group appeared from inside the gas station. He was older, maybe mid-30s, with a scruffy beard and a worn-out baseball cap. He introduced himself as Eric and gave me this intense stare, like he was trying to figure out why I was there. Honestly, I was starting to wonder the same thing. "So, where are we actually going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jess took a drag of her cigarette and looked at me, then at Kyle and Eric. She shrugged. "Not really sure. Just away, you know?" "Away." That's what she said. And for some reason, it felt like the most real thing anyone had said to me in years. We sat by the van for a while, just talking. It turned out Jess had just quit her job on a whim after her boss yelled at her for being late for the 100th time. Kyle, the mechanic/sometimes roadie for a local band, had no clear plans for his life. Eric had the least to say about himself, but he mentioned something about leaving a bad breakup behind. And me? Well, I didn't have a story like theirs. I wasn't running from anything. I wasn't lost. But sitting there with them, I realized that maybe I was stuck. Stuck in a routine, stuck in a life that felt too safe, too predictable. The night crept in, and the stars were brighter than I'd ever seen. We decided to camp out by the road, sleeping in the van and my car. I remember lying in the backseat, staring up through the window at the endless sky, feeling more alive than I had in years. The next morning, we didn't talk much. We just packed up and hit the road again. There was something peaceful about the silence between us. No one asked where we were going, and no one seemed to care. We drove for another few hours before we came across a diner, the kind you only see in small towns. We pulled in, sat at the counter, and ordered breakfast. The place was empty except for us and an old man reading a newspaper in the corner. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some grand adventure. It wasn't about finding ourselves or escaping the past. It was just life happening, one moment at a time, with people I barely knew but somehow felt connected to. After breakfast, Jess announced that she was heading further west. Kyle said he'd probably go back to the city, and Eric. Well, no one knew where Eric was going. As for me, I thanked them for the ride, got back in my car, and drove south, back to my predictable life. But something had changed. It wasn't anything drastic or life-altering. I didn't quit my job or move to a new city. But I stopped being so afraid of the unknown. Sometimes, the best moments in life are the ones you don't plan for. And that's how I accidentally joined a road trip with strangers. It wasn't wild or crazy. It was just real. And that was enough. Second story. Okay, so here's something that happened to me a few years ago, and I still can't believe it. I never thought I'd be the type of person who gets locked inside a supermarket, but life has a way of making you the punchline of your own joke, doesn't it? It all started on an ordinary Thursday. I had just moved to a new city for a job, and everything felt slightly off. You know, that weird limbo when you don't really feel like you belong anywhere yet? That was me. Work was fine, but I didn't know anyone, so my social life was basically Netflix and trying to remember to water the one plant I brought with me. That night, I realized I was out of pretty much everything in my kitchen, which was embarrassing considering how close I lived to the local supermarket. So, I decided to make a quick run before it closed. The store was this big, 24-hour chain, and I figured, why not? I'll grab some essentials. When I got there, it was already late. Maybe around 10:30 p.m. The store wasn't crowded, just a few people wandering the aisles and one guy stocking shelves. I went in with the mindset of getting in and out as fast as possible, but then something happened. You ever go shopping and get lost in the aisles? That's what happened to me. I started with a loaf of bread, then thought about making pasta the next day, so I grabbed some noodles. Then, I saw some random seasoning I hadn't used in ages, so I thought, why not? By the time I realized how long I'd been there, it was almost 11:30 p.m. But that wasn't the weird part. As I made my way toward the checkout, I noticed something odd. The store felt quieter than usual. Not just empty, silent. The kind of silence that gives you goosebumps for no reason. I shrugged it off and kept walking. When I got to the registers, there was no one there. Not a single cashier, no self-checkout lights blinking. Nothing. Now, I'm not an easily spooked person, but something felt off. I looked around for an employee and saw no one. I went to the customer service desk. Empty. I walked back toward the aisles, maybe thinking someone would pop out of the stockroom. Still, no one. At this point, I started getting a bit nervous. I checked my phone, 11:45 p.m. The store should have still been open, or at least someone should have been cleaning up. But instead, it felt like I was the last person on Earth. I decided to call out. Hello? Anybody here? No response. I wandered back to the entrance, and that's when I saw it. The big glass doors were locked. I pulled on them, thinking maybe they just needed a good shove, but nope. Locked, for real. I'll be honest, panic started to creep in. I walked the length of the entrance, trying to find another way out. Nothing. I went back to the aisles, hoping I'd bump into an employee or at least find an emergency exit. As I walked past the freezer section, I finally saw movement. A guy in his early 20s wearing the store uniform was casually wheeling a cart full of boxes. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, I think the front doors are locked. Can you help me get out?" He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "We're closed," he said, like that explained everything. "I get that, but I'm still in here," I said, trying not to sound sarcastic. "Can you unlock the doors?" The guy just stared at me for a second, like he wasn't quite sure what to do. Let me check with my manager." And then he walked off, pushing his cart and leaving me standing there. I assumed he'd be right back, but after about 10 minutes of waiting, I realized he wasn't coming back. At this point, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went back to the front of the store and started looking for any kind of emergency exit. That's when I noticed a set of glass doors leading to a side hallway. They were marked to employees only, but at that point, I didn't care. I pushed through and found myself in a back corridor that looked like something out of a horror movie, fluorescent lights flickering, bare walls, the faint hum of a generator somewhere in the distance. I followed the hallway, hoping it would lead to a way out. Instead, I found myself in what looked like a storage area with stacks of cardboard boxes and cleaning supplies. Still no sign of another person. It was honestly starting to feel surreal, like one of those dreams where you're in a familiar place, but everything's just slightly wrong. I decided to backtrack to the main store. As I walked, I passed the break room. The door was ajar, and I could hear voices. I peeked inside and saw 2 employees sitting at a table, watching something on a laptop. They didn't even notice me. I knocked on the door frame, startling them. Hi. I think I'm locked in the store?" The look on their faces was priceless. The guy with the laptop jumped up, nearly knocking his coffee over. "Wait, what? How are you still in here?" That's when it hit me. They had closed early and somehow missed the fact that a customer was still wandering around the store. The girl grabbed a walkie-talkie and called the manager, who showed up looking completely confused as to how this had happened. They unlocked the front doors and apologized about a dozen times. Apparently, they had some new closing procedures and missed a sweep of the aisles before locking up. They offered me a discount on my groceries, but honestly, I just wanted to get out of there. I finally walked out into the cool night air, feeling like I had just escaped some weird liminal space. I got in my car, drove home, and spent the rest of the night trying to process how I had just been locked inside a supermarket for over an hour without anyone noticing. So, yeah, that's the story of how I spent a night trapped inside a supermarket. It wasn't a life-changing event, but it sure as hell made for a good story at the next work meeting. Now I double-check the store hours before every late-night grocery run. Third story. Alright, so this is one of those stories that's funny now, but at the time? Not so much. You know that saying about being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Yeah, that was me. It all started on a regular Tuesday night, maybe around 11 p.m. I had just finished up some work at home and felt like I needed to clear my head. I do this thing where I go for late-night walks when I'm stressed. I don't know why, maybe it's the quiet, or just the act of moving around when the world is asleep, but it helps me relax. So, I threw on a hoodie, slipped my phone and keys in my pocket, and headed out. I live in a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood, so I never really worried about walking late at night. It's the kind of place where you can walk around for an hour and maybe see 2 cars and a guy walking his dog. I was about 20 minutes into my walk, just vibing, listening to music on my headphones, when I noticed a car slowly driving behind me. You know that feeling when you just know someone's watching you? Yeah, I got that. At first, I figured they were just looking for a parking spot or maybe trying to find an address. But after a minute or 2 of this car creeping along, I started to get a little paranoid. I took a quick glance over my shoulder. The car was a white sedan, pretty basic, nothing too suspicious on its own, but it was definitely following me. I pulled out my phone and considered calling a friend, but then the car sped up and pulled over right in front of me. At this point, my heart was racing. I was thinking, is this it? Is this how I get kidnapped? Mugged? Worse? 2 men in plain clothes jumped out of the car, and before I could even process what was happening, one of them flashed a badge. "Sir, can we talk to you for a minute?" I'm not going to lie, I thought I was about to get arrested. I quickly yanked off my headphones, heart pounding in my chest. Yeah. What's going on? The first guy, who had this serious, no-nonsense look about him, asked, "Where are you coming from?" "Up at my house?" "Just a few blocks back," I said, gesturing over my shoulder, trying to keep my voice steady. I could feel sweat starting to form on my forehead, and my mind was racing, trying to figure out if I had done anything illegal without realizing it. Spoiler, I hadn't. "Where are you headed?" the second guy chimed in, his eyes scanning me like he was trying to size me up. "Nowhere, really. Just taking a walk." "Is something wrong?" They exchanged a look, and then the first guy pulled out a small notepad and started flipping through it. "We've had reports of a man matching your description involved in a possible kidnapping earlier tonight," he said. Wait, what? I think my brain stopped working for a second. A kidnapping? Me? I must have looked like a deer in headlights, because the second guy immediately said, "We're not saying it's you, but you match the description pretty closely." Now, I'm standing there in my hoodie and sneakers, trying to comprehend how I could possibly match the description of a kidnapper. "I've literally just been walking around my neighborhood," I stammered. "I haven't even seen anyone." The first officer nodded, still not entirely convinced. "Do you have any ID on you?" Luckily, I had my wallet in my hoodie pocket. I handed over my driver's license, trying to keep my hands from shaking. They looked it over and asked a few more questions: where I lived, how long I'd been out walking, if I had seen anything suspicious. I gave them all the answers I could, and after what felt like an eternity, they handed my ID back. The second guy softened his tone a bit. "We've been on the lookout for a white male, mid-20s, wearing a hoodie, just like you. We had a report of an attempted kidnapping at a nearby park, and the suspect fled on foot. You're not under arrest or anything, but we had to check. Now, I've never been in trouble with the law, so the idea that I could even remotely be a suspect in something like that was insane to me." I told them again that I had been walking for about 30 minutes, minding my own business. I even showed them my phone with the step tracker app to prove that I had just been out walking. They finally seemed to believe me, and the first officer apologized. "Sorry for the confusion. Just bad timing, I guess. But if you see anything suspicious, make sure to let us know." I nodded, still too stunned to really say anything else. They got back into their car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling like I had just narrowly escaped being thrown into some weird crime drama. Once they were gone, I stood there for a minute, just processing what had happened. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or panic, so I did a little of both. I mean, how often do you get mistaken for a criminal while just trying to distress from work? I turned around and headed back home, my relaxing night walk officially over. I kept checking over my shoulder the whole way back, half expecting another cop car to roll up and question me again. When I got home, I texted a few friends to tell them what had just happened. They didn't believe me at first, but after some convincing, they agreed it was the most bizarre thing they'd ever heard. The next morning, I checked the local news, half expecting to see a story about the actual suspect. Turns out, they caught the guy a few hours after I got stopped. He'd been hiding out in a park not too far from where I was walking. Same height, same hoodie, but he ditched his shoes, which was apparently a key detail in why the cops didn't think it was me. So yeah, that's the story of how I accidentally got mistaken for a kidnapping suspect. Moral of the story, maybe rethink those late-night walks if you live near a park and fit the vague description of a wanted criminal.